What is up, nerds? My name is Jeremy Akers, Jeremy Nathaniel Akers, and I am making this video basically to answer a question for Nancy. But I'm going to try and give you nerds just enough context to hopefully keep up. So let's get into it. So liberating structures design system, blah, blah, blah. That's a thing that I did mostly by categorizing the design elements. So the design elements are the instructions for each individual liberating structure. There are 5 design elements. So when I say there is a supportive set of design of structures that are mostly around organizing and decentralizing, distributing the participation of interaction, I'm just saying that these design elements seem very foregrounded in the way these structures work. So I bucket them together and say those are interaction patterns. And I say, while there's still instructions for both of these things in all of these interaction patterns, it's mostly about those things and the way that those design elements support the parts to party, right? You can think about your teams, your orgs, yada, yada, yada. Inquiry, I basically say, hey, there are some structures that are much more around the design element of, or the instruction for invitation. It's the question, it's the prompt that sparks the conversation, that guides the conversation. We offer a question to guide the conversation. I pick circles for inquiry or for questions because, circle questions are parts of larger exploration, but they're also whole things in and of themselves. They have this holonic quality to them. There's also something around possibilities and offers in game design, but maybe that's too much. Definitely artifacts. So artifacts, there's another category of liberating structures that is very goal-like. You're creating or using a thing, and that thing is a sort of target to orient to. And all I'm saying when I say artifact liberating structures is, I mean, hey, the design element of how materials and space are organized or how stuff gets used is really, really at the foreground of this liberating structure. This particular structure, for example, eco-cycle planning, man, it's really all about that visual of the eco-cycle that helps drive the conversation and actually guide many steps of inquiry, right? I think also artifacts tend to be a sort of visual that helps to retain and make sort of canon a particular line of inquiry. We find that line of inquiry so useful that we say, man, if only we had this, handy visual tool to help us keep track of it and make it, idiot proof so we don't forget any goddamn thing. Voila, you've got yourself an artifact. So it's really about those maps and mapping and how those, like I said, guide the conversation. So again, data compression, right? We can summarize everything I just said by I took these design elements, and these design elements, to summarize, are the different sets of instructions for liberating structures. So every liberating structure contains instructions for these 5 design elements. That is the definition of the liberating structure. And I said, hey, some structures are much more about those ones, some structures are much more about those ones, and some structures are much more about those ones. So now, to answer the question of what do we do about the structures that are in the gray area, because these sound like super nice, clean, awesome, there's a bucket, no, let's actually use the symbols. So there's a bucket, there's a bucket, and there's a bucket. But these things are leaky. They're not obviously that simple. They're just kind of about those things, and they have all of the instructions in each one. So, without further ado, with regards to structure, so there's a visual taxonomy about how I laid out these cards. So straight up is the most this of this, right? It is the bucket, the gestalt of the bucket. And the layout of these as well, and the order of operations is basically how I would offer them to people is where I think the value is. Obviously, that's a very political. I've got an axe to grind. I think mutual support is the thing. I think in a lot of contexts, working in circles is very accessible. Include and unleash everybody. For fuck's sake, get out of presentation paradigm. But with regards to the orientation, because that was the point. So these are very, very, very much in the category. This one is while in the category of interaction patterns, simple ethnography invites us to do the Gemba walk, to go and see and observe and do our site visits and our field interviews to come to new insight about what's going on and sort of reduce the computational bureaucracy through observation. So even though it's very interaction driven, it has the most quality of an artifact, because what are we doing? We're going, we're documenting, we're artifacting, we're being ethnographers. We are creating artifacts, in fact. These other ones that are oriented this way, I think those ones are the most inquiry-like, meaning that of these interaction patterns, they tell you the most what to do with them, right? I think Troika and Wise Crowds are both interaction patterns because they have this, shut the fuck up and listen aspect. That's the most fundamental interaction pattern in both of those patterns to me. Get some goddamn advice by keeping your mouth shut. That pattern is great, but it sends the conversation in a specific direction. That is mutualism. Improv prototyping, using these iterative cycles of observation and mutation intentionally. Really very interactive pattern, because we're sort of in this role play-esque, this improvisational prototyping space. But again, we're generating novelty, and that's not as neutral as something as like 1, 2, 4 all. That really sends the interaction in a particular direction, because that's the quality of inquiry, in my opinion. Or that's the quality of questions. We use those to guide the conversation. And last but not least, what I need from you is upside down, because what I need from you completely fucks my buckets, right? What I need from you is both an interaction pattern, because the interaction of, representative democracy, going from a subgroup into the whole, into a collective space, back into subgroups, back into a collective space, back into subgroups, right? This sort of breathing that we do in what I need from you is like it is its own interaction pattern in and of itself, right? There's a primitive in there of a pattern that deserves to be highlighted because that's so powerful to do. Also, once more, what I need from you is very inquiry driven. It's very driven on this question about satisfying needs. Asking for what you want and receiving the response to that information. That sends the conversation in such a clear direction that, obviously that design element of invitation is essential to it. It wouldn't be the same without it. And it's also very artifact driven, right? When I need from you, I like to use index cards. Those index cards, we sort of exchange them like a post office in those exchanges. So for me, what I need from you is very much about the way that artifact of that index card and the formality of exchanging these questions and returning specific requests is part and parcel what makes the structure so significant. Without that move, you lose all of this wonderful quality of ritualizing conflict, So that's how sort of the gray areas exist in the buckets for interaction. Next up is inquiry. So inquiry, I'm really still working on, truth be told. I can see what I'm trying to visualize in the layout of these cards is that there are some relationships. There are, I think, in my mind, some very clear pairings as it relates to the questions that we offer that drive the conversations. What is not clear to me yet is how these pairings or how these questions relate to each other completely. So, but once more, so again, discovery action dialogue totally like breaks the system as far as I'm concerned, because the design element of the design elements of interaction, small groups with a person as scribe, with a person as host, that that sort of kills it. That makes the discover action dialogue the thing, or not so small groups, right? Getting lots of cross pollination in those settings. Just as well, the question, obviously, the line of inquiry in the case of discovering action dialogue. How do I know how do I know when the problem is present? What do I do when I normally solve it? And what prevents me from solving it from all of the time? Who do I know that is extraordinarily effective at solving this problems and doesn't seem to get stopped by the stuff that stops me? And, what ideas to come up when I think about aping those nerds, right? And who needs to be involved in that stuff? Any volunteers? That's the line of inquiry for discovery action dialogue. Hugely powerful line of inquiry. What a fucking game changer! I mean, 7 killer questions. I want those in the game ASAP, as far as I can tell. And of course, by virtue of having the scribe, having the note taker, we ensure artifacts, right? So again, it breaks this it's so much more than the category of inquiry, but it's also so specifically like inquiry, man. Like using questions to guide a conversation. Discovery action dialogue like is the textbook definition for how to do that, right? And so there's also a relationship between wicked questions and integrated autonomy, right? We create the paradox. We figure out how to actually answer the wicked question. There's a relationship to me between Triz and 15% solutions, both of which are sort of orienting ourselves towards more of the present / future. We're using hypothetical. What could we do to fuck that shit up? We're in the space of, all right, what could we do with what we've got in the kitchen, right? There's something very, very neutral to me about what, so what, now what, and min specs. They're extraordinarily clean and extraordinarily practically focused, right? What's essential? Such a big move. And the organization of information, just don't know what I did there, but here we go. But the organization of information into data, inference, and then action points, like, game changer. And then, of course, I think appreciative inquiry or interviews and heard, seen, respected are a natural pair. Both are orienting themselves to the past, tell a story about when something that went like I want things to go now, right? Tell a story about a good time that we can look for nuggets of information about how things go. And heard, seen, respected, tell a story about a bad time, a time you did not feel heard, seen, and respected. And then helping heuristics, right? Helping heuristics is quite a very interaction-oriented inquiry structure, because we're using the same basic architecture of Troika, right? We're using a trio, number one, and we're having 2 people talking and 1 person listening. But the move here that makes it not so specifically focused, or maybe would be better if the relationship to Troika were emphasized, because then we can reveal how just shifting the dynamic from, oh, the two people talking are the two people in active dialogue and a third person is listening that is just there as the observer is a significant shift in within the constraint of the triad and the same basic move of two people talking, one person listening. But we're offering the rules of participation and the heuristics being the sort of questions, the line of inquiry that we're following via the heuristics. And then 9 whys. I do think this is the order of operations. This is the way I think they're the most valuable. I think discovery, action, dialogue, positive deviance all day. I think get beyond polarity by embracing paradox. I think get practical, really get practical. Use narrative exploration. I mean, these are a shame. Of course, these are the best, frankly, but I'm just making a vibe. And I think, for me at least, 9 whys lives and dies on the ability of my partner to help guide my inquiry. That's not a thing that I think is readily available out of the box to a lot of people. Of all liberating structures, I think that one makes me the most uncomfortable because of the way that it relies on the personal skill of the participants to elevate the structure. Of course, that's not fair. Of course, the 9 whys helps elevate the personal skill by being in the structure as well. But if I have a great partner in inquiry, I'm going to have a totally different experience than if I'm with some noob that's just going to run it like a standard inquiry and ask me why 9 times in a row, which is fine. It's also cool. It's a vibe. My point being, in this pairing, I think you need helping heuristics to practice your inquiry skills. Generally, I often pair helping heuristics with clean language, and so I think you need some practice, both here and here. I tend to embed clean language and here, so these sort of support getting into the 9 whys and making it the most value I think it can offer. Last but not least, we've got interaction. So, or no, not interaction, artifacts. And I know artifacts is a little bit of a weird word, but I don't have a catch-all for like documents in human culture. Because I think these are a little bit more than just creating and using documents. The first one I would give to anybody out of the gate would always be drawing together. I find it extraordinarily useful to compress information based on those 5 visual symbols. We can start to really create a design style and aesthetic that is very intuitive, very open for interpretation, and generatively ambiguous. And I use it all over the design system. So the sooner you get that, the sooner you realize that you can play with it in very non-standard ways, right? Next up on the docket, eco-cycle planning all day, every day, of course. And then open space technology. So we've got, open space technologies rotated. So, of course, these guys, very, 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 very super artifacts, right? These are the thing. Open space technology and 2510 crowdsourcing, more than any other of the artifacty structures, are more interaction patterns to me, of course. Open space technology for the fact that it helps to guide the interaction. It uses the artifact of the bulletin board, our Excel spreadsheet with time, spaces, and topics, the intersection of those things. That artifact makes organizing the time, attention, and energy of hundreds of people trivially simple. So, of course, it's an interaction pattern, as well as being driven by that artifact, and maintains that quality of neutrality as well. You can use open space technology damn near for anything you can possibly imagine, because its foregrounds participation, the interaction patterns, plus that with augmented by the power of that artifact in particular. 2510 crowdsourcing, same, right? To take the index cards out of, so 2510 crowdsourcing. I hate being non-presumptive. 2510's crowdsourcing. So, we're in a room full of 20 people. We give everybody an index card. They write down their favorite idea on it. And then we shuffle index cards, and everybody ends up with a random index card at the end of that shuffling. They score that random card on a scale of 1 is meh, 5 is this is awesome, I want to help. And we do that 5 times in a row. So every card has been scored by only 5 people on a scale of 1 to 5. So we take the cards and we stack them up in order of highest score to lowest. And we say, all right, in our subset of 20, we're going to take a look at 2, all right? We're going to keep this real brief. The 2 cards that, were perfectly imperfect, of this perfectly imperfect voting mechanic is this one and this one, right? And it's just, it works. So, but it's through the transformation of the artifact, of the index card, that the interaction becomes a totally different thing, right? We realize in this very fun and dynamic way that without talking, we have so many tools in our toolkit to organize information and to exchange ideas. And it doesn't have to be fucking perfect to be fair enough to work, right? I think that's also a magic thing. And then design storyboards. Design storyboards is really, it is an artifact that it was the first artifact I focused a lot of my attention on, and I think that helps pay dividends because it has the quality of organizing all this other shit within it. However, there's a chicken or the egg thing, right? Design storyboards are only valuable at the point, I think, once you're sort of rapturous super user, once you're at the point where you've got, a dozen structures, then design storyboards start to make a lot of sense because we can think about stringing. But even if we can't think about stringing, we can still think about design storyboards for every agenda item in the world. So that's the nuance here. And then Panarchy, I think Panarchy once more, it breaks all the fucking categories, right? Panarchy has such an emphasis on interaction and how subgroups get cross-pollinated and how knowledge flows to where it has interest and expertise organically. That is such a part of Panarchy that without it, it's not the same thing. Obviously, Panarchy has a specific direction that it guides the conversation in that, we're thinking about nested wholes, parts and wholes, which is ecological in nature, as a side note. That's not a neutral conversation. But it is the artifact, the visualization or the representation of those temporal and spatial scales and how they might relate to each other that's a hard thing to do, almost impossible, until you get the artifact of the holons in there, until you start representing this stuff and you go, oh, well, this is easy. If I represent these ideas, the relationships between these things visually becomes trivially simple. So, and that I think is pretty essential, so I like to cheat and offer actually Panarchy in the first slot. I know that's like overwhelming, but if I had my way, I would say, hey, right out of the gate, Panarchy, bam, get yourself the idea of, stacking contexts and get yourself the idea of the ecocycle, and bam, we have just like green-pilled everyone, right? That's the most regenerative possible liberating structure of all time. And then after that, open space technology, like I said, Swiss Army knife, good for everything. Agreement certainty matrix, like know your context. Otherwise, you find yourself in the wrong solution set. Social network webbing. I'm a relational nerd. Always going to emphasize pushing and massaging the relational topography and that relational coordination piece. Generative relationships star because it's super simple. It's just so simple, so good, and it also primes us for the 2x2 matrix and critical uncertainties. Purpose to practice, of course, enduring legion. I think it's a little boring, but of course, it's necessary. Anyway, I'm the least. In addition to my open inquiry on how, no pun intended, on how the inquiry questions come together, sort of relate to each other, because I would like to actually see almost a compass so that I can visualize the way that different questions guide the conversation in different directions. That I'm still trying to figure out in a way that is simple. See, and here, with regards to artifacts, I hate the order of operation, basically, that I've put down. These are just all bad. They're all tremendous, and I want them first, But if I've got to choose, maybe I'm choosing this. I put down this one changes the most every time I look at it. The relationships on the inquiry questions, these relationships are very stable. What the relationships are across these tend to move around. I've visualized them in a circle with a sort of compass thing before. I'm not married to any of those, but I do like these pairings. So, and this way, they seem to fit nicely with 11 in each bucket, even though there is, of course, a lot of gray area. The second part of your question, Nancy, how did I come up with what decision did I make to include some of the liberating structures in development? And that was, I didn't. I used Keith's 5.3 version, so he made a selection, and I just organized them. I'm not sold. I mean, I've never done Liquid Courage. I mean, it looks like fun. Also, never done Caravan. Looks like fun, but these seem to me like very much bespoke remixes. I get that they show the super fun active creative wizardry design side of liberating structures, but for me, Spiral Journal, I'm probably gonna remix this so Spiral Journal's there, because that's a structure that I just keep coming back to around inquiry. There were fewer of these structures that I could actually shoehorn into the category of inquiry. The one I'm missing is grief walking. I keep coming back to grief walking. Transition walking is such a powerful line of inquiry. It's so great. And, these are fine. I'm fine with Anxiety Circus, even though it's, whatever. I'm fine with network padding cards. I'm fine with strategy not working. Those are great. So yeah, that's it. Anyway, my name's Jeremy Nathaniel Akers. That is the most high fidelity and nuanced take on yonder liberating structures design system, and how those well-defined buckets are actually pretty bleaky. But I think the buckets are useful, especially in the exercise of the selection matchmaker. Why do I say that? Because the selection matchmaker, for me, always took a long time. I would always, circle 20 of these things, which is not particularly helpful, right? Because the selection matchmaker is only helpful if you can narrow it down to no more than 3 structures. So by basically saying, all right, the white column is interaction, the gray column is inquiry, the dark column is artifacts, saying, hey, first just ask yourself the question in your context, which one of these columns is the most relevant? Do I think that communication and the group dynamics are the thing that needs influencing? Then go hog wild and focus your attention on interaction. Am I looking for the right question to guide the conversation in a helpful direction right now? Then, questions, inquiry is your bucket. Am I looking for, some form of visual sense making, framework or, documentation? Then, maybe focus your attention on the dark gray bucket for artifacts. By eliminating 2/3 of the entire catalog from the start, I'm hopeful that out of that 10, we can get to 3, or out of that 11, we can get to 3 very quickly, basically. And is that does that make some unfair eliminations? Yeah, absolutely. Do I actually expect anybody's gonna not peek at the stuff in the other columns? Of course they're gonna peek, right? And they're gonna find stuff that they go, oh yeah, that could work too. So I'm not tripping about that. I'm just hoping it's helpful, and I want to also use this opportunity to embed these buckets that I keep referring to as this design system for liberating structures in nerds' heads. I think that thinking about structures in this way of relationship does 2 things. One, it really helps organize the structures in a way that's quite easy to grok, right? Once I've made the move to organizing the 33 structures into 3 buckets, then it's super simple to just remember, 3 categories of 11, or maybe not 3 categories of 11. I'm not finding the visual I'm actually looking for. So anyway, I think it's easier to teach people in the first setting 4 structures of 3 different types is 12 structures. But I think you can grok them. I know where it is. I got it. I got too many places with too many notes. I'm sorry. I'm really revealing a lot of my brain to you at this moment, nerds. I apologize. But thinking about this pedagogical goal in particular is why I think this move is so game changer. Because if I just give nerds 12 structures, it's too many to learn on the first go. But by splitting them into 3 well-defined buckets and saying, hey, I'm going to give you a few things in each one of these buckets so that you have some choices to make, I think you get a lot of value with very few choices. And the order that I would do that is, Troika, Wise Crowds, Helping Heuristics. I would offer those as a complex, actually. But if I had to pick, it would probably be Troika. 1, 2, 4, all, of course. The drink and the 2-step. Conversation Cafe would be the first one I give actually out of the gate, because I think it requires the least social capital. It requires the least adjustment to groups. Right? If I'm on a group of or a call, if I'm in a team, I don't have to spin up breakouts. I just have to say, hey, can we, I heard this thing about, it's really good for everybody to talk as much as they listen, and to talk and listen as much as each other. So let's just try and do that with this talking object. I think it's really easy. And actually, I wouldn't give impromptu right away. I would either give conversation or UX fishbowl or celebrity interview. Those would be my first 4 in the interaction category. Those would be the best in slot, because these can get you out of presentations. Those can save your life. That gives everybody going. That helps each other, and that it doesn't require too much doing. In terms of inquiry, in flying in the face of, like I said, this every time I look at this is different. I would offer these guys probably out of the gate. I don't like that, but 15% solution, what's what now what, to me are just too good to be true. And then Everybody loves Triz. Everybody always loves Triz. Probably appreciative interviews to get on the positive side, even though we've got 15% solutions. So I'm not married to that. But I think, let's start with those guys. Sure, if you want. But like I said, I'm a little sketched out by Nine Wise for beginners. Anyway, and then with regards to artifacts, best in slot goes to drawing together, critical uncertainties, ecocycle, and open space technology. Too good for everything. Like I have made a career in so many different places of throwing open space technology at everything, and it always works. Ecocycle is ecocycle, right? Bootstrapping the regenerative, cultural transformation. Drawing together is just too much fun. And critical uncertainties, nerds seem to love it. Anyway, probably what I need from you in that place. But anyway, critical uncertainty is still great. So that is sort of my best in slot. I think these buckets make that pedagogical step. If we can offer these, I don't know, in one day, my first thought is in 3 different sittings, so that we can think about our interaction patterns and how we can integrate those, and our inquiry and how we can integrate those. There's also, of course, a pedagogical thing right here. You can't screw up 1, 2, 4 all. It just doesn't break. You can't. You just can't. Like, it just turns into a conversation if it gets screwed up. And that's what you had in the first goddamn place. Inquiry, wielding the right question at the right time, does require a little bit more skill. You take some more reps of like just doing 1, 2, 4 all before the dawning realization comes. Oh, I can ask the right. Some questions are better than others at different times. And then frameworks, I don't know. Sometimes these things are just too big and clunky for us to make them as light and as easy as they can be. And so I think they should be approached with skill, even though in my experience of thinking about structures through this design system, these things are what people remember. Actually, people remember the ecocycle, they remember the drawing together, they remember open space technology. If it has a visual, it gets remembered, and it becomes the name of the meeting, basically, is the artifact that we're creating. So it tends to really. I've also been thinking a lot about the taxonomy of these things, right? So is it possible to have a way for us to articulate with language the way that we're using these different design elements and signifying the moves that we're making with them? That hasn't come all the way together, but I think it works. I think it works well enough as it is right now, just thinking about the way that these foreground some design elements more than others. What was I going to say about taxonomy? Because when I start to think about these design elements, the design elements themselves as the atomic units, right? I'm no longer thinking about whole structures. I'm thinking about each structure as a conglomeration of the 5 different design elements. And I'm not taking the structure, I'm taking the design element for this and taking the design element for that. When I start to create these hybrid structures, right, like Wise Fish, like Caravan, in those hybrid structures, it still tends to be, to me, the artifact that I'm intentionally trying to integrate artifacts, and the artifact is the most remarkable and salient thing for people outside of the room. Interaction is never art relevant for people outside of the room. Like, my stakeholders don't care if I came to that conclusion via 1, 2, 4 all, or if I spent all night thinking about it, or if I had a eureka moment in the shower. It's irrelevant to them, so they don't care. They're often not even concerned about the question that got us to that realization. They don't care about necessarily the journey of exploration, insofar as it's valid. As long as it passes that check, great. You did that, excellent. I don't need all the detail. I ain't got time for that shit. So from the outside in, when I send invitations to meetings, I'm almost always only pointing to the artifacts, because that's the thing that's visible to people from the outside looking in, which is what we are in advance of the actual session itself. So that's what I mean when I say thinking about the taxonomy of how I express and articulate what in God's name we're doing together in a way that's legible to other nerds, if not transparent, because it becomes opaque, because I'm nerding out so fucking hard. Nobody can comprehend what I'm talking about unless you're deep in this goddamn game. Anyway, man, no. You guys are trying, right? If you're at this stage in this video, thank you so much for trying to understand what the hell I'm on about. Really appreciate your time, attention, and energy. So, Nancy, that's the way the gray space in between the buckets and stuff like that. So this is probably, unfortunately, the best and most... I mean, this is just the creative process, isn't it? I mean, at least for me, I feel like I'm just fucking holding on to my ass. Like, barely, like... Look at this shit. I'm barely scribbling down, like, in a frenzy, like the transmissions from the imaginal realm, and I'm just barely keeping up. I keep imagining that at some point, this thing will be so clear. I'll sit down and I'll have time to clarify it and make it all pretty and shit. But no, it's just new discoveries. So, I guess what I'm saying is this is as good as it gets, nerds. I'll keep trying. Keep trying to make it pretty, put it together the way it should be. Anyway, have fun. My name is Jeremy Akers, Jeremy Nathaniel Akers. This is Wise Crowd's Liberating Structures design system. Find a link to the selection matchmaker. Go use it. Send me some field stories. Pretty, please. I want to see if it actually does make your life an easier, better thing. And if you start thinking about liberating structures from the lens of being in these buckets, does it help make them more easier to explain to nerds and to get into and start stringing and designing super nifty, ultra custom, maybe useful hybrid structures? Maybe useful. You know what I mean, nerds. Getting so geeked out on our geeky shit. Making shit overly complicated. Maybe. Anyway, my name's Jeremy. Thanks for your time. Go get them. Use it. Be dangerous. It's political. I'm still trying to hit